Okay, are you dealing with oxalate overload? Are you dealing with mast cell activation syndrome, right? Typically, these are symptoms of other things going on upstream in the body. Oftentimes, it can be an infection, like a fungal infection. Fungal infections can lead to MCAS, they can lead to oxalate overload. I'm going to show you how that happens. And oftentimes, even the fungal infection is not the root cause. The fungal infection comes in to clean up a toxic environment. So I'm going to show you a real client case in which we connect metals to fungus all the way down to MCAS and oxalate overload. Okay, so this is a 62-year-old male, relatively healthy guy before the pandemic. The pandemic was a stressor that sort of sent him over the edge and revealed probably some of these underlying imbalances that were building in his body. And so now I'm working with him and we're dealing with some of the stuff down here at the bottom row. Mast cell activation syndrome, oxalate overload. So this describes a lot of the symptoms he's dealing with. So when it comes to the mast cell, there's the fatigue after meals, there's the histamine symptoms, there's the difficulty thinking, there's the brain fog. When it comes to the oxalate overload, what he has is frequent urination, and every time he pees or even poops, it's as if he's passing oxalate crystals. So very uncomfortable, very painful. However, these symptoms are really downstream from a chronic fungal infection. So he has had Candida for decades, and he basically has managed it with fluconazole and other antifungal medications. So when he goes on the medications, a lot of his symptoms have resolved. The Candida has gone away. When he comes off of it, the Candida comes right back. So this again shows us how even Candida is not a root cause for a lot of people. Candida will come into a toxic environment. Specifically, when someone has a very, very, very persistent fungal infection, you can almost reliably predict that there's a mercury problem. Candida is a very potent bioaccumulator of toxins, specifically mercury. So Candida can absorb a tremendous amount of mercury into its cell walls. So Candida, bacteria, parasites, they come into toxic environments and they remediate them. However, when we have a chronic fungal infection, we get secondary effects, right? So it's not good to have a chronic fungal infection because we get a lot of what we see down here below. So what do I mean by that? So when you have a Candida infection, the Candida attaches to the gut lining, it creates leaky gut, it creates endotoxin production. That alone can trigger mast cells and histamine, MCAS. Candida by itself can produce oxalates. So a lot of people with oxalate sensitivity, they have a massive Candida problem because they're having a lot of internal production of Candida. For some people, they overdosed on food-based oxalates like spinach, right? So they just had raw spinach smoothies for many, many years with almond milk and almond butter, and that's the reason why they have oxalate overload or oxalate dumping. In this individual's case, he's on the carnivore diet right now and basically has been for a while. It's not just a dietary-based thing. When he has more high oxalate foods, it sort of adds to the problem to some degree, but a lot of his oxalate dumping is coming from this very, very persistent Candida infection. So what has actually been helping this individual? Well, number one, controlling the symptoms of the mast cell activation syndrome. So he's been taking a non-drowsy allergy medication, an H2 blocker, in the morning and at night. And he's also been taking a hydrochloric acid supplement alongside that because H2 blockers will lower your stomach acid. So it might be a smart thing to do if you are taking allergy medication. And this has had a tremendous impact on reducing some of these symptoms of mast cell activation syndrome, just like overall fatigue and brain fog, especially after eating. When it comes to the oxalate overload, it's a little bit more of a complex picture, but what he has found relief from is things that help his liver function. So again, low bile production leads to poor fat absorption, leads to fat binding to calcium, which leads to oxalates not being bound to anything, leads to this oxalate dumping, oxalate overload phenomenon. So when he does things to improve his bile flow, he generally feels better. He digests food better, he has more energy, and he just feels better overall. So we have him on some liver support, we have him on Bile Flow Plus, and we have him on a supplement called TUDCA. Both of these improve bile production, and he's having better digestion and just feeling a little bit better overall. He also does coffee enemas, and when he does coffee enemas, he feels a reduction in his symptoms. Some of these urinary tract symptoms, as it relates to the oxalate overload and also like foamy urine, seem to lessen in severity when he does coffee enemas. So anything that detoxifies the liver is helping with this and this as well. So we've also got him on the nicotine patch protocol. So if you know about that, you know it's been helping him with cognition and helping him with energy. But a few major points to get across here. Number one, if your detox organs are working well, you can manage a lot of toxicity and stress. You might be able to even live in a moldy environment and not really feel the effects of it. You could get bit by a tick, get transferred Lyme disease, and not fall into chronic illness. However, over time, when your detox systems get overwhelmed, which for a lot of people is going to be at a different level of stress and at a different age, eventually you will have a toxicity crisis and then fall in to a lot of these symptoms. The symptoms will be overwhelming, and you'll probably have chronic fatigue, cognition problems, anxiety, depression, and you'll be trying to pick up the pieces and wonder what went wrong, right? And then you get into functional medicine, you get into working with holistic nutritionists, and a lot of people that, a lot of information being given on TikTok, a lot of it is surrounding the bottom of the pyramid here, right? So it's treating MCAS as the root cause of your problems. It's like, I finally figured out I have MCAS, or I finally figured out I have oxalate sensitivity, when really, right, these are things you developed after a while. You didn't have these things earlier in your life. There's typically causes upstream. In this case, Candida can be a major cause of both of these things, MCAS and oxalate overload. And even the Candida is not at the root cause of the infection. So the first clinic I worked at, we did a lot of work, and we were doing holistic nutrition at the bottom of the pyramid. We would do low histamine diets, low oxalate diets, low sulfur diets. We'd give people DAO enzymes, and people would get symptom relief. They would come back after the first visit and they would feel better. But when they would go back to a more inclusive diet, when they would have oxalates, when they would have histamine foods, or just something like wine, that would set off their symptoms, which eventually notified me. I'm like, okay, we're not quite getting at the root cause. At the time, I really didn't know how to address the root cause. And sometimes it's not so simple. Like in this client's case, right? Just getting a mercury amalgam removal will not be the end all be all of his problems, but it's part of his root cause solution. And he, as the client, has to consider the pros and cons of even doing that, including things like cost. And so sometimes you have to hang out at this bottom level. You have to work on detox. You have to work with binders. You have to work on symptom relief so that the body can have less stress overall. And it's possible to be well with things like mercury amalgams, right? So I don't want this to be some sort of doom post where it's like, oh no, I have mercury amalgams, I'm going to have all these problems, or that's the cause of all my problems. It's not necessarily true. However, it can be a major stressor that can be a downstream cause of many, many problems. But when you hear a lot of rhetoric online, you want to be aware of, like, are we talking about symptoms, or are we talking more towards the root cause? There's a lot of emphasis on MCAS and oxalates as being root causes of people's problems. That's not usually the case. Doesn't mean we don't want to reduce symptoms, but we want to understand how Candida can be related to both these things, and how even a fungal infection, a parasitic infection, bacterial overload might be present due to an overall toxic environment, which is why things like replacing people's minerals, detoxifying their body, detoxifying the liver, using binders strategically. These are things that help people over time to actually get their resiliency back so that they can have a inclusive diet, so that they can have energy and do things that they used to be able to enjoy to do. So I hope this helps, and I hope this gives you a picture of how these things can be complex, but a lot of the things that people are calling the root cause of their problems are actually just symptoms of things upstream.